Okay, welcome back to the second in a series of videos in which I will be fully annotating Shakespeare's Othello. This is designed to help support A-level students as they study or revise the play. So we were talking last time about the opening of the play in which Iago reveals to Roderigo his hatred of Othello and explains his reasons for this frustration on the basis that he has been passed over for promotion by Othello in favour of Michael Cassio. Roderigo is very rapidly brought round to Iago's way of thinking about Othello and acknowledges the sort of frustrations that Iago may be feeling, saying if he'd gone through something similar, I rather would have been his hangman. So expressing solidarity with those feelings of frustration and hatred and bitterness that Iago is explaining. Iago responds, why there's no remedy, 'tis the curse of service. Preferment goes by letter and affection, not by the old gradation where each second stood heir to the first. So these lines, as we spoke about last time, reveal Iago's sense of class envy. He's frustrated at what he perceives to be a nepotistic society around him, in which promotion depends on personal recommendation and one's influence and one's connections, rather than one's skill or one's level of experience. He talks about the old gradation being one in which those who had the most experience in a particular role moved up through a hierarchy. He says that that is no longer the case. So contextually here, we get to see a really clear picture of that sense of the rigid hierarchical structure that exists within Renaissance Venice, the time and the place in which the play is set. Iago continues, now, sir, be judge yourself whether I in any just term am afined to love the more. So he says to Roderigo, surely you can understand now and you can be judge yourself whether or not I have any reason to feel love for Othello. And note again, we still haven't heard Othello's name referenced here. Every time that Iago talks about Othello, he responds to him with this word more, being a direct reference to Othello's race and skin colour. And this reveals Iago's complete prejudicial preoccupation with that aspect of Othello's character. Roderigo, again empathising and supporting Iago's feelings of frustration and hatred, responds, I would not follow him then. Iago continues, O sir, content you. I follow him to serve my turn upon him, meaning I plan to use him for my own advantage. So he plans to exploit Othello in some way to achieve his own wicked objectives. We don't know what those are yet, and as the play progresses, we realise that Iago seems to be improvising his plan as he goes along. So here we realise the depth of Iago's betrayal of Othello. Not only does he loathe Othello secretly, but he is actively plotting in some way against him. He says, we cannot all be masters, and again that reveals his sense of frustration and bitterness at the rigid class structure that he lives in. We cannot all be masters suggests that he acknowledges that everyone has a particular role cut out for them, has a particular place that they belong to in this hierarchy, and he accepts that that will not change. Nevertheless, we do get very strongly the impression that he is not happy with his position within this hierarchy, and he plans himself to escape it. He also says, nor all masters cannot be truly followed. Not all masters are worthy of one's loyalty, and he refers to Othello in this way. Now, in these next few lines, he refers to those members of society who are loyal to their employers or their masters, as he says. You shall mark many a duteous and knee-crooking knave that, doting on his own obsequious bondage, wears out his time much like his master's ass, for naught but provender, and when he's old, cashiered. So here he mocks and ridicules sort of bowing and scraping members of society who live in a sort of servitude or as implied by the word bondage, slavery. And he suggests that there are people who enjoy that position, will wear out their time much like their master's ass, meaning like a donkey, like something that is used like an animal. Now, Iago does not consider himself to be like these people whatsoever, and indeed is completely scornful of the way that they behave. He goes on to say, whip me such honest knaves. And this is, as you can see from the annotation here, a contemptuous dismissal. So interestingly, Iago has no respect for honesty or people who are loyal. He sees them as being exploited like an ass. He doesn't have any respect for those who do not have the sort of ambition to pursue their own advantage. And he refers to them with this oxymoronic phrase, honest knaves. Knaves implies a sense of wickedness, whereas honest implies a sense of loyalty and of goodness. Now, the word honest is going to recur throughout the play, and it's going to be applied wrongly throughout the play to Iago himself. We will see the name Iago pre-modified with that word honest again and again and again, as Iago is spoken about in that way by Desdemona, by Othello, and by other characters as well. He is seen to be an honest gentleman. So the fact that within the first minutes of the play, Iago expresses utter contempt for the idea of honesty very clearly aligns him with wickedness, with evil. We see that he is truly the villain of the piece. He goes on to explain the sort of individual that he sees himself to be. Others there are who, trimmed in forms and visages of duty, keep yet their hearts attending on themselves. So there are others who show all outward signs of duty and loyalty, but in their hearts are focused on themselves. They are selfish to the core, and throwing but shows of service on their lords, do well thrive by them, and when they have lined their coats, do themselves homage. These fellows have some soul, he says, and such a one do I profess myself. So instead, he suggests that ideally one would be continually keeping an eye on one's own situation, looking for ways to profit by appearing to be honest and dutiful and loyal, whereas constantly in the background you are in fact plotting to achieve your own ends. For, sir, it is as sure as you or Roderigo were either more, I would not be Iago. So if he were in Othello's position, he would see what kind of man Iago is. Now, this is Shakespeare foreshadowing Othello's great flaw within the play. Othello's fatal flaw, his hamartia, is his credulity, the fact that he believes that things are the way that they appear. In essence, he's gullible. Iago, on the other hand, being a much more suspicious kind of individual, almost a paranoid individual, does not have that weakness, and he is able to exploit it in others. Now, Iago's great skill throughout the play is that he is able to turn other characters' greatest strengths into their weaknesses. So the fact that Othello is trusting goes from being, a virtuous trait to being a weakness to be exploited. In following him, Iago says, I follow but myself. So he's really clear that his only loyalty is to himself. Heaven is my judge, not I for love and duty, but seeming so for my peculiar end. For when my outward action doth demonstrate the native act and figure of my heart in complement extern, 'tis not long after but I will wear my heart upon my sleeve for doors to peck at. Now, in these lines, Shakespeare uses this metaphor of wearing one's heart upon one's sleeve for doors to peck at. This suggests to us that Iago sees honesty as a weakness. He compares being honest and being understood when his outward actions marry up with what he actually thinks and feels. That is when he will be weak. When his behaviours and his actions and his speech are true to what he thinks and feels, that is when he will be vulnerable. And he compares that behaviour, that act of honesty, as being like wearing one's heart on one's sleeve to be pecked at by birds, jackdaws which snap up every trifle. So he sees honesty as a dangerous way to live. He sees it as a weakness and as a way to make oneself vulnerable. And indeed, as we go on throughout the play, other honest characters, such as Desdemona, are indeed made vulnerable by Iago. Now, here, this caesura, this full stop that falls in the middle of the line, draws our attention to this final sentence of Iago's speech, and an absolutely essential quotation to understand for Iago. He says very simply, I am not what I am. And that is a really fascinating paradox, because it suggests to us that not only is Iago not what he appears to be, but he defines himself through a denial of what he is. And in doing so, he defies our comprehension. Anything that we might think that he appears to be, by his own explanation, he is not. I am not what I am. So he defines himself using that negative construction, and in doing so, he earns our horror and our fascination at the same time. Look at how he dominates again on the page, the sheer extent of speech that he is allowed in comparison to Rodrigo. Okay, moving on. Rodrigo, what a full fortune does the thick lips owe if he can carry it thus? Note the way he refers to Othello here, using this description of his facial features. This demonstrates Rodrigo's racist prejudice. We still haven't heard Othello called by his name, but both Rodrigo and Iago seem utterly fixated upon his race. Iago, call up her father, rouse him, make after him, poison his delight, proclaim him in the street, incense her kinsmen, and though he in a fertile climate dwell, plague him with flies, though that his joy be joy, yet throw some chances of vexation on it, as it may lose some colour. Now, interestingly, these metaphors of poison and pestilence, poison his delight, plague him with flies, form part of a pattern of speech that recurs throughout Iago's language. He's associated here with poison and with plagues, poison and pestilence that align him with the wickedness and the evil that he is capable of committing. That word poison in particular is really powerful when we think about later on what he is going to do to Othello. He spoils the happiness of others, poison his delight, and turns others' happiness and others' goodness and the beauty in others' lives into horror and chaos. So here he is, encouraging Rodrigo to go and shout under Brabantio, Desdemona's father's window, and explain to him what his daughter has done. This detail being that she has eloped with Othello. She's gone and got married to him in secret. Rodrigo says, "Here is her father's house, I'll call aloud." And Iago encourages him to do this in a really provocative manner. Do it with like timorous accent and dire yell, as when by night and negligence the fire is spied in populous cities. And Rodrigo does exactly what he's told. These are imperatives here. Do. He commands him. Iago has control over Rodrigo's behaviour, even to being able to kind of orchestrate the way in which he behaves. He's stage managing this performance, and he's doing it in order to elicit the most possible offence and fear and confusion from Brabantio that he possibly can. So we see Iago here really as kind of an agent of chaos. He constructs this entire scenario, and he's going to encourage Brabantio to see the marriage of Othello and Desdemona in a very specific way. So, what ho, Brabantio, Signor Brabantio, home. Rodrigo wakes him up. Awake, yells Iago. What ho, Brabantio? Thieves, thieves. Look to your house, your daughter, and your bags. Thieves, thieves. Look at all of these exclamatives conveying that sense of urgency and volume as well in the way that these lines are to be delivered. Now, thieves, thieves, repeated 4 times there, is a really fascinating word choice, and it reveals again Iago's misogyny, his hatred of women. He sees women as possessions. He sees them as something to be owned, like a house or bags. So he objectifies Desdemona by putting her in this list of things that can be stolen from Brabantio. And this is the way that he immediately starts to characterise her marriage to Othello, the man she loves deeply. He characterises it as a theft, and in doing so he presents Brabantio as someone who has been wronged, the victim of a crime, someone who has had something stolen from him. And again, by doing so, he characterises Othello as criminal and thief. Okay, so Brabantio appears above at the window, and he appears in the role of this angry patriarch. He's furious about being awoken in the middle of the night and about the chaos that Iago is stirring up. What is the reason of this terrible summons? What is the matter there? Rodrigo, is all your family within, Signor? Iago, are your doors locked? Now, momentarily, Brabantio is told by Rodrigo. Rodrigo explains that who he is. But Brabantio cannot see Iago, and Iago does not explain himself and doesn't identify himself. And because he remains anonymous, he has absolutely no qualms and no hesitations about being utterly offensive and trying to provoke Brabantio in the most extreme ways. "Are your doors locked?" he says. "Why? Wherefore ask you this?" says Brabantio. And Iago again uses crude language. "Zounds, sir, you're robbed. For shame, put on your gown. Your heart is burst. You have lost half your soul. Even now, very now, an old black ram is tapping your white ewe. Arise, arise, awake the snorting citizens with a bell, or else the devil will make a grandsire of you. Arise, I say." Now, this is Iago's version of events. This is how he perceives the marriage of Othello and Desdemona. Now, he controls this sort of unfolding drama. He forces his version of events upon Brabantio, and he characterises their marriage. First of all, he doesn't say that they are married. He simply refers to them engaged in sexual activity. And he talks immediately about the pain and the suffering and the sorrow this is going to cause Brabantio. Your heart is burst. You have lost half your soul, that half your soul being Desdemona. This repetition of now, very now, creates a sense of urgency and is intended to paint a picture in Brabantio's mind of what is taking place. He's trying to upset and distress him. And he refers to Othello and Desdemona as an old black ram and white ewe, respectively. And that bestial imagery dehumanises Othello. It portrays that match as unnatural, and through the use of this crude sexual imagery, Othello is revealed to be a fairly repulsive individual. Again, talking about Othello, he refers to him as the devil. He says, "The devil will make a grandsire of you. The devil will make you a grandfather." So your daughter is being attacked, is the way that he is phrasing this. Othello, being described as the devil, is presented as predatory, and this plays into this Renaissance racial prejudice and racial stereotype of black males as inherently predatory and sexually threatening. So, in addition, by characterising Othello, by describing him as the devil, it aligns him with evil and sin, and again, that reveals Iago's racial prejudice. Now later, we learn of the deep respect that Othello and Desdemona have for one another. So Iago, in talking about them in this crude, sexual, bestial way, reduces their love to something base and repugnant. He sees their love as something fundamentally disgusting and something that is entirely driven by sexual impulses. Later, we are to learn that nothing could be further from the case. Okay. Rodrigo speaks much more respectfully to Brabantio and refers to him as most reverend signor. So we have this strange juxtaposition of Iago's utterly crude, disgusting language and then contrasted with Rodrigo's much more respectful tone. Brabantio does not recognise his voice, so Rodrigo identifies himself, but Brabantio is not happy to hear from him. And we learn really clearly, Brabantio says, "I've charged thee not to haunt about my doors. In honest plainness thou hast heard me say, my daughter is not for thee." So we learn that Brabantio rejected Rodrigo as a suitor for Desdemona, and this also reveals Rodrigo's reason for his involvement in Iago's plan. He hates Othello because Othello has married the woman that he loved and wished to possess. So this is his reason for becoming involved in this. He also feels jealousy, and this time, while Iago feels professional jealousy, as Cassio was promoted instead of him, Rodrigo feels romantic and sexual jealousy because Othello has married the woman that he desired for himself. Brabantio continues, "Now in madness, being full of supper and distempering draughts, upon malicious bravery dost thou come to start my quiet." So he is commanding, he is assertive. He feels in control of this situation and essentially tells Rodrigo that his behaviour is completely out of line. He implies that he's drunk. Rodrigo attempts to be respectful. "Sir, sir, sir." Brabantio says, "But thou must needs be sure my spirit and my place have in them power to make this bitter to thee." So Brabantio reminds Rodrigo of his position within society. He's a senator, he's a politician. He threatens Rodrigo and says that this behaviour will end badly for him. Rodrigo urges patience. Brabantio demands an explanation. "What tells thou me of robbing? What are you talking about? I've been robbed. This is Venice. My house is not a grange." So he says, my house isn't some isolated country house. This is Venice. This is a city. And he refers to Venice in a way that depicts it as civilized. Now, throughout the play, we're going to have this contrast, especially when the action of the play moves to Cyprus, of Venice as a place of civility and order, whereas Cyprus is portrayed as a place of war and chaos. And as soon as the action moves to Cyprus, that sense of chaos escalates. So here we have Venice being characterised and established as a place of order. Most grave Brabantio, again the respectful tone from Rodrigo. In simple and pure soul I come to you. This is ironic because there isn't really anything particularly pure about the way that he is behaving. But Iago cuts in and again attempts to be more provocative. He tries to elicit a stronger reaction. Zunse, and again that crude offensive language. This is an oath, so Iago's speech is peppered with swearing. You are one of those that will not serve God if the devil bid you. Because we come to do you service and you think we're ruffians, you'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse. You'll have your nephews neigh to you. You'll have curses for cousins and jennets for Germans. Now, because he is referring here directly to Brabantio, he says, you'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse. He is implying that Brabantio is complicit in his daughter's sexual assault. He's saying, because you think that we are ruffians, you think we're here to do you some harm, you are allowing this to happen to your daughter. And again, we have this really crude, animalistic, bestial language. He refers to Othello as a Barbary horse, an African stallion. And because of that, he's saying that your family members will be animals as well. Your daughter is going to give birth to animals because she is right now, at this moment, sleeping with an animal. This is the way that he characterises Othello in this incredibly crude, deeply racist description. Brabantio is naturally utterly offended by this revolting description and says, "What profane wretch art thou?" So he's deeply offended, and this is an accurate characterisation of Iago. He is a profane wretch. And really fascinatingly, while he is anonymous here, this is him speaking in a really true voice, perhaps. He's revealing the depths of the horror that is concealed within him, that is hidden behind this apparently honest and respectable facade. So Brabantio demands to know who he is. Iago remains anonymous though. He says, "I am one, sir, that comes to tell you your daughter and the Moor are now making the beast with two backs." So right at this moment, your daughter and Othello, he finally reveals here who he's speaking about slightly more clearly. They are having sex right at this very moment. Okay. Now, in a moment, I'm just going to give you a little bit more context in terms of what this says about the patriarchal society of Venice. Again, Brabantio correctly understands who Iago is and how he's behaving here. He says, "Thou art a villain." And this really clearly establishes who Iago is here. And Iago responds, "You are a senator." So this is, again, an insult directed at Brabantio. Perhaps he is implying that politicians aren't ones to judge who the villains are within society. And you can see here from our annotation, the actor's tone must determine the sense of this insult. Brabantio says, "This thou shalt answer." So this very blunt, direct statement here, you will answer for this. And he blames Rodrigo. He says, "I know thee." So he is saying, you will have to pay for the offences that you're doing to me now. But Rodrigo becomes more respectful and says he will explain everything. He says, "I beseech you, if it be your pleasure and most wise consent, as partly I find it is, that your fair daughter at this odd even and dull watch of the night, transported with no worse nor better guard, but with a knave of common hire, a gondolier, to the gross clasps of a lascivious Moor, if this be known to you, and your allowance, we then have done you bold and saucy wrongs." In a nutshell, he says, we've come here because we want to help you. Your daughter has been transported in the middle of the night by a gondolier to the arms of a Moor. So he's explaining what has happened. Desdemona has left her home in the middle of the night and has been taken to Othello. So Rodrigo is saying, if you already know about this, then we've done you wrong indeed. Now, this description of Venice at this odd even and dull watch of the night establishes a sense of danger and a violation of the social order. The social order has been threatened by this action. The gross clasps of a lascivious Moor refers to Desdemona's embrace by Othello, which Rodrigo here describes as being something revolting. If you know not this, my manners tell me we have your wrong rebuke. So Rodrigo says, if you weren't aware of this, then you're insulting us wrongly. Do not believe that from the sense of all civility I thus would play and trifle with your reverence. So I wouldn't, knowing who you are, knowing your position in society, I wouldn't be so disrespectful to you if, I wouldn't do that wrongly. Your daughter, if you have not given her leave, I say again, hath made a gross revolt. Now, look at the way that patriarchal Venice is being set up here and established. We can see, our notes on context here, that the patriarchal nature of Venetian society is established in the way that the male characters discuss women. Here, Rodrigo is saying, if you've not given your daughter permission to leave the house at night, then she has rebelled against your authority. Now, later, Brabantio is going to believe that Desdemona is a passive victim rather than a willing bride, and that reflects again this Renaissance racial stereotype of the black man as sexually predatory. His belief that Othello has used witchcraft, which is going to be mentioned at the end of this section of the play, equally aligns Othello with the devil. So we see here this patriarchal society being portrayed as Rodrigo characterises Desdemona's behaviour as a revolt, as a rebellion. He says that she is binding her duty to Brabantio as a father, her beauty, her wit, her intelligence, and her fortunes in an extravagant, unwheeling stranger of here and everywhere. He's referring there to Othello, and this reveals that Othello is not Venetian, and also that Rodrigo has a xenophobic view of their marriage. He has no respect for Othello because he is not from Venice. He is portrayed straight away as an outsider. So it's important that we note here that Brabantio's social standing is really threatened by Desdemona's rebellion and her elopement with Othello. And later in the play, Desdemona will acknowledge that she has broken all society's expectations by choosing to marry someone who is much, much older than her, who was not chosen for her by her father, and who is outside her race. This list here, her duty, beauty, wit and fortunes, these are perceived as some of Desdemona's virtues and some of her characteristics, some of the things that Rodrigo suggests she's thrown away by marrying Othello. Straight satisfy yourself, Rodrigo says. Go and look in your house. If she be in her chamber or your house, let loose on me the justice of the state for thus deluding you. So go and check that Desdemona is truly gone, and if I'm lying to you, then I will face whatever justice you deem necessary. Which Brabantio does. Strike on the tinder, ho, give me a taper, call up all my people. So he goes immediately to light the lamps to try and establish whether or not Desdemona is there. And here we see that actually these ideas have occurred to him before. He says this accident, this chance occurrence, is not unlike my dream. He goes on, belief of it oppresses me already. So here we get the impression that actually Brabantio has already imagined this scenario taking place. He feels oppressed by the possible truth of Rodrigo's words. He's becoming anxious, and we see straight away that Brabantio does not relish the idea that his daughter has eloped with Othello. Light, I say, light. And these exclamatives now as he calls for light, symbolising truth and clarity, those exclamatives revealing his growing desperation and panic. So, at this point, Brabantio leaves, but so does Iago. Farewell, for I must leave you. It seems not meet nor wholesome to my place to be produced, as if I stay I shall, against the Moor. Now there's real irony here, because nothing that Iago has done is wholesome, but he acknowledges in these lines that it would not suit him to be discovered as speaking out against Othello in the middle of the night in this way. He says, for I do know the state, however this may gall him with some check, cannot with safety cast him. So I know, Iago says, what will happen as a result of this, and even though this may go badly for Othello, he is needed to the state. They're not going to discharge him from his role as general. For he's embarked with such loud reason to the Cyprus wars, which even now stands in act, that for their souls another of his fathom they have none to lead their business. Now this is the foreshadowing here of the military conflict that later is going to command our attention. Othello is going to be sent away to fight a war in Cyprus, to fight against the Turkish invasion. Now, Iago also notes here some sort of slight praise of Othello. Another of his fathom, they have none. So Othello's unparalleled as a general. Though I do hate him as I do hell's pains, Iago says, yet for necessity of present life I must show out a flag and sign of love, which is indeed but sign. Now, Shakespeare has repeated this idea several times at this point, that Iago is plotting against Othello and will betray him, establishing deceit as a key theme within the play. In these lines, Iago is established as being intelligent, manipulative, dangerously powerful as he commands and controls the unfolding action. That you shall surely find him, lead to the sagittary, the raised search, and there will I be with him. So farewell. So Iago directs Rodrigo to tell Brabantio that they will find Othello at the Sagittary, the name of the inn that Othello is staying at. That's where Othello and Desdemona have taken lodgings. At that point, Iago leaves. Brabantio returns in his nightgown with servants and torches, horrified to realise that the story is true and that Desdemona is gone. Brabantio's first simple line, "It is too true and evil." So he refers to this immediately with utter horror. He refers to it as evil. Gone she is, and what's to come of my despised time is naught but bitterness. So he is absolutely distraught and dreads the thought of the rest of his life, which is purely going to be one of bitterness because of his daughter's actions. Later in the play, Brabantio is reported to have died, and it is sort of implied that part of his reason for dying too soon is his horror and his grief at Desdemona's elopement and her marriage to Othello. He knows that he is going to be scorned by society because of what Desdemona has done, so he will pay some kind of social price for her decision. Now, Rodrigo, where didst thou see her? O unhappy girl! Would the Moor, sayest thou? Who would be a father? How didst thou know 'twas she? Oh, she deceives me past thought. Now, look at the way in which Brabantio's sense of control and authority has been subverted and undermined here. That loss of control is illustrated via repeated questions, but he doesn't even wait for an answer. And those questions are broken up by miserable exclamatives in which he loudly bemoans Desdemona's choices and expresses real grief and horror at what she's done. Oh, she deceives me past thought. And that idea of women as deceitful, and Desdemona in particular as being capable of deceit, is one to pay attention to because it's going to recur throughout the play. And it's established really, really early on, all the way back in Act 1, Scene 1. What said she to you? Get more tapers, raise all my kindred. Are they married, think you? Now look at the way in which Brabantio is reliant on Rodrigo now and is demanding all of this information. We also see Brabantio's horror as he desperately inquires, do you think that they are married? He's wondering whether it is too late already. Truly I think they are, says Rodrigo. Oh heaven, again an exclamative, how got she out? How did she escape? And this is quite a fascinating one, isn't it? Because again we see his paternal authority has been undermined by her rebellion. We see that he has lost control of his daughter. And we also see that sense of gender roles being discussed there, because women are being portrayed as simultaneously as objects, but also creatures that must be controlled by men. Now, "O treason of the blood" is a line that you should absolutely keep. This is a really clear illustration of Brabantio's horror at Desdemona's marriage to a man who is black. This phrase also illustrates the idea that this is a subversion of the natural order of things. Desdemona's marriage to Othello has gone against nature, is how Brabantio, Rodrigo and Iago all perceive it. So we see what an extraordinary act it is, and we start to wonder, we start to become fascinated by these lovers who have behaved in a really modern, contemporary way. We have an interracial marriage that is going to be, we realise, the central conflict within the play. This is what all of the other action is going to revolve around. Fathers, instructs Brabantio, from now on, trust not your daughters' minds by what you see them act. And there's that idea again. She deceives me past thought. Trust not your daughters' minds of women as capable of deception and as being fundamentally untrustworthy. And Iago is going to exploit that idea several times as the play progresses. He asks now, is there not charms by which the property of youth and maidenhood may be abused? So there's that willingness that we spoke about earlier on Brabantio's part. He prefers to imagine Desdemona as a passive victim rather than a willing bride. He cannot conceive of the fact that she would have married Othello out of love for him because he cannot imagine that she would love a man like him, i.e. one so much older and one who is not white. Again here, so we see the Renaissance era racist stereotype of black male as predator, in that word abused, and we also see that idea that Othello may have some way used magic or witchcraft to win Desdemona, again aligning him with dark and wicked and evil forces, devilish forces. So there we see the Renaissance era belief in witchcraft and magic, and we also see those racial prejudices, that racism that underlies that society. Have you not read Rodrigo of some such thing? And Rodrigo says, yes, sir, I have indeed. Call upon my brother, says Brabantio, and now we see Brabantio's regrets at not marrying Desdemona to Rodrigo, which he thinks would have been preferable now. He says, oh, that you had had her, I wish you had married her instead. Call some one way, some another. Do you know where we may apprehend her in the moor? I think I can discover him, if you please to get good guard and go along with me. Pray you lead on, says Brabantio. At every house I'll call, I may command at most. So Brabantio is getting together a search party to go and march upon where Othello is staying with Desdemona, hoping to demand some kind of satisfaction, to demand an explanation. Get weapons, ho, and raise some special officers of night. On, good Rodrigo, I'll deserve your pains. So Brabantio plans to reward Rodrigo for his help in alerting him to Desdemona's escape. So we see Brabantio's paternal rage there, his grief at his daughter's decisions, and we also have a sense of pace being built up by Shakespeare as immediately we see that this marriage is going to have sown the seeds of conflict within Venice. Now, just a couple of quick points in terms of criticism in this part of the play. Two ideas that you might want to note down. First of all, this one from E.A.J. Honigman. Othello is the most unbearably exciting of Shakespeare's tragedies. Now, I think I would draw your attention to those words unbearably and also exciting. We absolutely have this sense of action and drama, chaos unfolding in Act 1, Scene 1. So it is exciting in that sense, but that word unbearable reminds us that we are driving towards a truly distressing and upsetting conclusion. We know what is going to happen to Othello and to Desdemona, and this makes it unbearable to watch. Another piece of criticism from Dr. Johnson, a tremendous 18th century writer. The character of Iago is so conducted, he says, that he is from the first scene to the last hated and despised. Now, you may agree, you may disagree with that characterization, but really, really clearly we see in that line that it is arguable that Shakespeare has crafted this character to be repulsive and upsetting to us from the very opening moments of the play. Do you agree? Or could you potentially argue that Shakespeare has us collude with Iago by drawing us into his plans from the very beginning of the play? Ordinarily, the first character that we encounter in a work of art is one that we empathise and identify with. Now, if Othello is our hero, if Othello is our protagonist, why doesn't Shakespeare begin with him? Why does he leave Othello off stage for so long? And what do we learn by meeting Iago first? Some things to think about. All right, I hope that was useful to you, and next time we will continue with Act 1, Scene 2, in which we discover what is going to happen to Othello and we meet Othello for the first time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.